Okay, hi. So in the past few days, we have heard a lot about body-brain interactions and different kinds of body rhythms, like heart rate, breathing, and so on. And I would like to throw in another type of body rhythm into the mix now, and that is motor rhythms. So basically just the everyday activities that we do a lot, like walking, talking, maybe dancing, clapping. And specifically, I want to talk about how these motor rhythms might be connected to our perception, to our perceptual rhythms, and how brain rhythms might factor into that. So I want to start with brain rhythms because these are my favorite. So we all know that rhythmic activity is ubiquitous in the brain. So whether we use EEG, MEG, ECOG, we find brain rhythms in different frequency bands everywhere. And now, quite a while ago, we wanted to find out whether different brain areas have a different prevalence of brain rhythms or show different brain rhythm patterns. So what we did is we had MEG resting state data of 7. Oh, that's the old version. Okay. So there was some more data on the newer version. But we had 7-minute eyes open resting state data of 22 participants. And these were source localized, and then we used an AAL atlas to partialize the activity. And then we used different clustering algorithms to basically get to our regional spectral fingerprints. So the main work was basically done by k-means clustering, which we've heard before. And then for every brain area in this AAL atlas, we got a different pattern of brain rhythms. And I'm just showing you here the results for the left and the right Heschel gyrus, so primary auditory cortex. We have results for all brain areas, but auditory areas are most relevant for my work. And I think these also look really nice. So what you can see here is that in the left and the right auditory cortex, the rhythmic activity is characterized by peaks in the delta, theta, alpha, and beta bands. And we also looked at all the other brain areas, and the rhythmic patterns looked quite different than this. And we did some classification analyses and could conclude that every area has a characteristic pattern of brain rhythms. This was also replicated a couple of times. And basically what we can say is that these brain rhythm patterns generalize across individuals. Some more than others, but I'm very, very sure that basically all of us have this nice theta rhythm in our auditory cortex here. Most of us will also have the delta, or at least that we can quantify. So these generalize across participants. But since then, I became more interested in differences across participants. And I just want to illustrate how different these can actually look like. So this is the cluster, or the brain activity pattern that we've seen before of the left Heschel gyrus. And if we now single out the theta rhythm here, this is the group cluster, but we can look at all the individual spectra that form that group cluster. And we can see all the gray lines here. For individuals, there are differences in the peak frequency, but also differences in the peak amplitude. So we can say that individuals do vary in their peak frequency and amplitude in these frequencies. Now, this could be important, and there are a few theories that kind of imply that this is important. For example, this one here by Wolfgang Klimisch, where he talks about a lot of different things in this paper. I'm sure many of you know this. Talks about brain rhythms and how these are related to other body rhythms. And he also talks about, briefly, motor rhythms, and says that our body parts basically all have a preferred tendency to move, have a preferred rhythm, and this is also coupled to brain rhythms. So this implies that people who have maybe different, like a faster motor brain rhythm, might also like to move faster. And then there's the preferred period hypothesis, which is more on the behavioral side. And here, Macaulay said that we all have our preferred natural rhythm, basically, with which we walk and talk. So people who walk fast are also thought to talk fast and clap fast and swim fast and cycle fast. So these are thought to generalize. And importantly, these also affect our perceptual preferences. So that can mean either the rhythms we like to hear, or if there's a task, maybe the rhythms that we are particularly good at doing the task. And this is also thought to be related to intrinsic brain rhythms. So now I want to go briefly into music and speech and talk you through some results. So in one study here that is also preliminary, we wanted to know whether individual brain rhythm peaks predict the rhythm or the tempo that participants like to hear. And this was done by undergraduate stratus. And what we did is we gave people a task to do where they had to rate different drum grooves and had to say, or they had to choose which one was closest to their preference. If you could play the first one. So just 2-bar grooves, not too boring like sounds, but actually taken from different music types. Yeah, maybe one more, the second one. So that obviously is slow. The first one was 110 BPM, and they had a range available and had to choose the ones they like for different type of grooves. Then we also recorded resting state EEG. And from that, we used the spectral fingerprints framework to analyze individual auditory theta and motor beta peak frequencies, although I have to say in this instance, auditory and motor was just defined as the electrode locations, so not a very sophisticated approach here yet. And in this preliminary analysis, we had 16 participants. And what we found is that maybe people with a faster auditory theta rhythm prefer faster music. So here you see the auditory theta peak frequency and here the tempo preference, and there's a slight positive correlation between the two. We couldn't find anything between the beta peak and the rhythm preference. We looked for this because this has been shown before, but we couldn't replicate that. Now, in this data set, we also asked participants to tap their finger at the preferred rate. It's a task that is used a lot in this type of research, so just at a rate that feels natural and comfortable for them. And we could then basically correlate their perceptual preference with their motor preference. Here, we quickly analyzed the 32 participants that we had available, and we show here that the ITA, so inter-tap interval, if that is very long, so people are very slow, they also tend to prefer faster, slower music. But again, also preliminary, but I can say that this outlier, if it's taken out, doesn't change the results. Okay, now a quick case for how this might relate to speech, or how this might be the case in speech. I've shown you these plots before, so that's just the spectral fingerprint of the Heschel drivers in MEG data and the corresponding individual spectra in the theta range. Now, for the same participants, we also did an SNR task with them, so they just had to understand words in different, like, changing amounts of noise, and from that we got this SNR value that we then used for another part of the study. So it wasn't actually meant to be analyzed in that way, but just as because we had it, I thought, why not correlate the individual theta amplitude and this SNR value? And here we found that when people could deal with a lot of noise, so when the SNR was very negative, they tend to have a higher theta amplitude during rest. So the stronger intrinsic theta rhythm in Heschel gyrus and left Heschel gyrus could maybe be related to better speech and noise comprehension. And now we're doing a big study to kind of explore this further. And this is a large population study with 500 participants. We're about halfway through now. And this work is Yeah, so this work is shouldered by Tanya and Roseanne in my lab. It's a huge, huge task with 500 people, but what we're doing is, again, resting state, open eyes for 10 minutes. And from this, we can extract the individual peak frequencies and peak amplitudes in all channels. And then perceptual preference here is now not what they like, but what they're good at. So we test speech comprehension in challenging listening situations, so noisy speech, fast speech, and interrupted speech. And a little peek, because everything always takes longer than we think, so we're not very far with the analysis, but we could look at just 32 participants and actually see whether we can do the spectral fingerprinting analysis. And this is the spectral fingerprint of CZ, so an electrode that we know captures information from auditory dipoles. And this looks quite similar to the MEG results that we had, in that we do have delta, theta, alpha, and beta peaks in the EEG as well. Okay, just summary. So rhythmic activity in different brain areas generalize across individuals, but there are also differences in the peak frequency and the peak amplitude. And this individual variation could maybe have wide-ranging implications for our motor behavior, but also for our perception. There are some findings that support this, which I have shown you. But then I have to say that testing those preferences is always a tricky thing to do. You need the compliance from the participants, but also I think the effects that we look at are very, very small. And there are other things that influence, for example, motor preferences or perceptual preferences like the time of day, mood, heart rate. So I think looking at these behavioral or brain behavior correlations is quite tricky. There might be something there, but there are also some studies that show no relationship between different things, and it might be that there's lots of studies in people's draws where they actually didn't find any significant relationship. So I think the jury is still out whether all these things are related or not, and we need more research with large samples. Okay, that's me.
As before, one quick question.
Thanks for the talk. Since you mentioned Klimisch and that binary model, whatever, what's your opinion then on the role of the heart rate in defining, for example, speech rate preferences and anything else?
So, I mean, there are some really nice and interesting studies that show that heart rate, your current heart rate influences your rhythm preferences. And like if you do sports, then also you like to listen to faster, and so it like correlates with heart rate. These are quite old, from the 90s, with very few participants, so I'm not so sure. But I mean, the theory is that everything is related, right? Heart and brain, breathing, eyes, perceptual, motor, everything. That's the theory. So if the heart rate, so in theory, I'm not sure we could show that experimentally, but in theory, if your heart rate goes up, that is also related to your brain, and then either of those things or both, you know, whichever one drives it, would influence your speech rates preferences and your speech rate itself. So in theory, everything should be influenced together.
But so there is no empirical evidence, like, I don't know if you have ever found a paper on this.
The evidence is not great,
Yeah.
no. So not for heart rate and speech, but we could maybe take those findings from the 90s for beeps, for rhythms, and say this should also apply to speech rate. But we should just do it, yeah.
Thanks.